always from the heart of the city, and now on demand 24/7 on the CHFI website. This is the soundtrack to accompany an empty house. And I'm Don Jackson, around the world on the internet. Joyce Kilmer establishes the mood for the hour. And I quote, "I suppose I've passed it 100 times, but I always stop for a minute and look at the house, the tragic house, the house with nobody in it." Samuel Butler heard those same echoes in empty hallways that Joyce Kilmer wrote about when he said, "An empty house is like a stray dog or a body from which life has departed." Unquote. As kids, empty houses were a source of mystery and great delight. The older we get, we don't necessarily appreciate them in quite the same way. We'll open a few doors this hour with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Celine Dion and My Heart Will Go On, and Lady Antebellum and Need You Now. I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. She had been collecting pictures from magazines since she was little. Pictures of bedrooms with old quilts and 4-poster beds, kitchens with copper pots and blue china, living rooms with sleeping lassies curled on bright rugs, and walls covered with family pictures in gold frames. Before, these rooms had only existed in the pages of magazines she bought at garage sales in Tellico Plains, Tennessee. But now, she was on her way to California, on her way to live in such rooms. Unquote, an excerpt from Part 1, Chapter 1 of the #1 New York Times bestseller, Where the Heart Is, by Billy Letts, published in 1995 by Warner Books and one of the featured selections in Oprah's book club. It is about a 17-year-old girl by the name of Nova Lee Nation heading west with her boyfriend. She is 7 months pregnant. There is something about the number 7 that just doesn't sit right with her, and for very good reason, as you'll find out right at the beginning of the book. As Billy Letts goes on to write, she knew he was gone. Knew before she reached the door. She could see herself running, calling his name. The parking space empty, the Plymouth gone. He was going to California, and he had left her behind. Left her with her magazine dreams of old quilts and blue china and family pictures in gold frames. Unquote. Talk about feeling empty. As it said on the back cover of the paperback edition, now she finds herself stranded at a Walmart in Sequoia, Oklahoma, with just $7.77 in change. But Nova Lee is about to discover hidden treasures in this small southwest town. A group of down-to-earth, deeply caring people willing to help a homeless, jobless girl living secretly in a Walmart. They are about to take her on a moving, funny, and unforgettable journey to where the heart is. Unquote. An empty house this hour with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Avril Lavigne and Keep Holding On. And Fergie and Big Girls Don't Cry. I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. This excerpt reminds me of this book. It was a New York Times bestseller, in fact, a number one New York Times bestseller, and one of Oprah's favorites. Paul B. Lowney from the Lifetime Reader wrote, and I quote, "In a deteriorating love affair, you may be deeply torn between the choice of holding on or letting go. If you remain indecisive, the internal conflict can depress you and even make you ill. You should make a quick determination whether to hold on by fighting or let go by retreating. Holding on unsuccessfully is like clenching your fist tighter and tighter until your knuckles turn white. Letting go is like opening your fist. It feels better, but your hand is empty." Unquote. Paul B. Lowney from the Lifetime Reader. Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. Three Doors Down, Here Without You. Phil Collins, Against All Odds, and Jann Arden with The Sound Of. And I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. At the beginning of the show, I said that as kids, empty houses were a source of mystery and great delight. Some time back, I read a short story from a book about ghosts. The collection was called Postmortem, published in 1989 by Dell, a division of Bantam Doubleday Dell. The short story was called Servitor by Janet Fox. In it, the character has run away from an abusive marriage and headed back to the hometown she remembers from her youth. She, too, has very little money, but her need to get away from a marriage that is growing increasingly more dangerous leaves her little room to plan a more effective escape. At this point in the story, her car has broken down by the side of a country road, but she manages to get a ride the rest of the way. Knowing very few people there and having precious little resources, she decides to take up temporary residence in a house that was once owned by an eccentric recluse. A house that is reputed to be haunted, even to this day. The author writes, and I quote, "She stepped up on the porch every bit as cautiously as she had on those occasions when they'd sneaked up to knock on the door and run away. But this time, it was because the weakness of the old wood gave her a queasy feeling as she stepped on it. She pushed back the warped screen and tried the door. It swung inward at her touch in a way that made her uneasy. But when she went inside, all was innocent and quiet. She dropped her suitcase and moved through the other rooms, not daring the rickety stairs that led upward. The rest of the house was as empty as this room was, as full of echoes." Unquote. Of course, this story wouldn't have made it into this collection if the place didn't contain some kind of ghost. But for our purposes this hour, it's just another one of those empty houses. Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. March 24, 2010. Missing Everything But the Girl and Matchbox 20 Unwell. And I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. There has been a terrible accident. The book's main character decides to leave the accident and go in search of his old family home. And I quote, "Our house was near the lake and the beach, and my sister and I had kept it after our mother died because I guess we hoped it might be worth something someday. To be honest, I didn't have the stomach to sell it." I staggered up the front porch, the porch steps. I found the key we kept hidden under a phony rock in a flower box, my sister's idea. Looking over both shoulders, seeing nothing, no police, no people, not a single car coming from either direction, I pushed the door open and went inside. The house was musty, and there was a faint, sweet smell of carpet cleaner, as if someone, the caretaker we paid, had recently shampooed it. I stepped past the hallway closet and the banister we used to slide down as kids. I entered the kitchen with its old tile floor and its cherrywood cabinets. I opened the refrigerator because I was looking for something alcoholic. By now, this was a reflex with me. And I stepped back. There was food inside. Tupperware, leftover lasagna, skim milk, apple juice, raspberry yogurt. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if someone had moved in, a squatter of some kind, and this was now his place, the price we paid for ignoring it for so long. I opened a cabinet. There was Lipton tea and a bottle of Sanka. I opened another cabinet. Sugar, Morton salt, paprika, oregano. I saw a dish in the sink, soaking under bubbles. I lifted it and slowly lowered it, as if trying to put it back in place. And then I heard something. It came from upstairs. "Charlie." Again. "Charlie." It was my mother's voice. I ran out the kitchen door, my fingers wet with soapy water. Unquote, of course, an excerpt from another #1 New York Times bestseller, For One More Day by Mitch Albom, published in '06 by Hyperion. An empty house? Was the mother a ghost? Or was there something else really going on? I think you know the answer. I'm Don Jackson from iTunes and CHFI.com. Jacksoul on That Lonesome Highway. And the Beatles with Yesterday. I'm Don Jackson with Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. The book that also made it on the list of Oprah's book club, For One More Day by Mitch Albom. A few excerpts featured just a few moments back. In the book Where the Heart Is by Billy Letts, the main character is 17, 7 months pregnant, and left by her boyfriend at a Walmart store in a little town in Oklahoma. She has only $7.77 in her pocket. She knows no one in this small town and has no place to stay. In the #1 New York Times bestseller, she secretly takes up temporary residence in that Walmart store, living in a closet, as Goldilocks without her bears, as it said in the novel. It was this book that got me thinking of the theme this hour of empty houses. As you've heard, there are very few really empty places. Most are filled with the echoes of past lives. From an anonymous work composed in the 2nd century BC comes this. Before heaven and earth had taken form, all was vague and amorphous. Therefore, it was called the Great Beginning. The Great Beginning produced emptiness, and emptiness produced the universe. The combined essences of heaven and earth became the yin and yang. The concentrated essences of the yin and yang became the 4 seasons, and the scattered essences of the 4 seasons became the myriad creatures of the world. And this translated by G.W. Sargent, the words of Ihara Saikaku. Heaven says nothing, and the whole earth grows rich beneath its silent rule. Men too are touched by heaven's virtue, yet in their greater part they are creatures of deceit. They are born, it seems, with an emptiness of soul, and must take their qualities wholly from things without. To be born thus empty into this modern age, this mixture of good and ill, and yet to steer through life on an honest course to the splendors of success. This is a feat reserved for paragons of our kind. A task beyond the nature of the normal man. Translated by G.W. Sargent. Empty houses this hour. With Lovers and Other Strangers from iTunes and CHFI.com. I hope you will tell all your friends about Lovers and Other Strangers. Good night, sweet dreams. I'm Don Jackson.